this you're suffering the result of a generational curse, I will give you an honest biblical response. Because some of us say we have diabetes, and there was diabetes generations ago in our family and it continues. We have a cardiac problem, there were heart problems in our family generations ago. There was widowhood, and that widowhood has continued in our family. There was poverty, and the poverty has continued in the family. There were drunkards, and the drunkenness have continued in the family. So it is generational curses. I want to let you know that we are going to examine the biblical passage that speaks of generational curses. But before we get there, it's good for you to know that even Israelites who had that passage had difficulties knowing who was cursed and who was not cursed. One reason they had the difficulties because they never took time to learn and study this passage. Let me give you examples. Job in the Bible. The friends of Job who knew the Bible very well came and accused Job, thinking Job was cursed. But Job was not cursed. There was the blind beggar by the roadside. The disciples thought that blind beggar was suffering from the curse of a parents because of generational curse. Jesus said it wasn't because of generational curse. There were lepers in Israel, and when Jesus came, Jesus became like a friend to the lepers, went so close and touched them, walked with them. And the lepers, everybody thought they were cursed. Well, not every leper was cursed. So it was difficult to understand then. So do not just think, okay, because you hear generational curse in this passage, it means, oh, your family is cursed. And you see, this thing has been happening from one generation to the other. But before you think I am just using my philosophy here, it is good for us to look at that passage carefully. Some of you will be liberated and have joy and have peace, rather than sitting and thinking you are cursed and working hard and doing all your best, and the problem is never giving way. And when the problem is never giving way, you are still looking for a bigger prophet and better apostle or powerful man of prayer. You are laboring for nothing. It's good to be free. All right, so let us get to that passage, and the passage is Exodus chapter 20 verse 4 to 6. Most of us are familiar with this passage. This is what it says. I read, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." Lesson number 1, God alone will curse, or God alone will discipline his children in anger for endless generations. So take note, I'm using somehow synonymously, God will curse and the discipline of God in anger, because there is a discipline of God which is not in anger, which is just in love, but there is also a discipline of God in anger. I will deal with that in a subsequent sermon, but for now I see that principle possible, that I see a possibility of that principle of God's discipline of his children in anger. All right, so we shall look at that. But according to our passage, I want to emphasize this: God is the one doing the cursing, because our passage says he will visit the iniquity. He will show steadfast love because the sin has been done to him, and he is a jealous God. So why I want us to take note and underline that is because it is not simply about laws of the spiritual realm that we break. And when we break laws of the spiritual realm, the consequences will follow us and follow for generations, from one generation to the other. As though God just created the spiritual realm, put some laws there, and the laws are just fixed. You break the law, the consequences just follow. No, it is not. We read in this passage, God personally curses. You see, the laws of God are not the same like the laws of nature. When we think of the laws of nature and then we start speaking about the spiritual realm as if the spiritual realm just has laws that function like the laws of nature, then we are wrong. That's a profanity to the laws of God, which is not correct. No, they are not the same thing. God measures the curses according to the sin, and he measures the blessing according to the love shown to him. For example, two people may commit the same sin, but they did not commit equally that same sin. For example, better example, two thieves, they steal the same thing, but one thief is stealing because he was hungry, friends misled him, Another thief is stealing because he concluded in his heart, if you hurt people to benefit yourself, it is okay. If it was just laws and breaking of laws, then laws are blind, justice will be blind. We don't want blind justice. We want just justice. For just justice to happen, where each person is punished according to the proportion of their sin, there must be someone who is capable of judging the sin, judging the heart. And that is why we say God does the judgment, and he has said he does the judgment. He does the cursing. The second thing we want to learn from this passage is that God does not curse any generation for imaginary sins. So do not just sit and start imagining some sins and building up some sins, and then when you imagine them, you build them up, you make them complex, you conclude, therefore we have been cursed. I remember one time as a young man in Africa, a missionary got us youth into a retreat. And then when he got us into a retreat, he started teaching us that all of us who are black and are in Africa, we are cursed and we need to be able to break that curse. So his mission was to teach us how to break that curse. His reason, because all of us come from families that have at one point in our generations past had idols that were worshipped, ancestors who were worshipped. So that was his conclusion. Well, let us look at this passage. This passage speaks of God is going to curse those who create an image of himself which he has forbidden. But that's not all. God also says of those who hate him. So God uses hatred, and hatred now broadens the sin to include all the 10 commandments completely. We know that when Jesus came, for example, he taught that murderers are haters of God. And then he broadened the sin of murdering. Angry people are murderers. Those who insult others despitefully are murderers. Those who do not love their neighbors like the rich young ruler, and name the rest, they are those who hate God. So hating God is broadens it. So if you think, okay, this curse is only for those who play around with magic and spirits and idols, no, those who hate God. So take note of that. The third thing I want us to learn from this passage is that God's blessing surpasses his curses. This is what verse 5 and 6 says. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the number 1, 2, 3, third and fourth generation, but showing love to thousands of those who love me. So compare. God is ready to show love, to steadfast love to thousands. Well, his judgment is to the third and fourth generation. It's intentional to show us that God's blessing surpasses his curses. So before you are thinking you are cursed, remember we are dealing with a God whose love is great, tremendously wonderful. I wish you knew how much God loves you than thinking about how God may have cursed you. Fourth lesson, God's blessings or curses are conditional. You see, though generational, they are conditional. If any one of the blessed generation suddenly becomes an idol worshiper, the chain of blessing breaks in that line. Meanwhile, if any one of those who belong to the generation that have been cursed becomes a worshiper and a lover of God, the curse breaks. We shall have, in the subsequent lesson, explain and show how this works. But again, they are just conditional. The fifth lesson is that God's blessings and curses are more complex and bigger than physical manifestations. You see, the emphasis in this verse is not about the generations and the curses in the generations, but rather about the relationship of individuals to God. Either individuals are having a very bad relationship with God, like they hate God, or individuals are having a good relationship with God, like they love God. Why do I know that? See the contrast. The contrast is not God is going to curse to the third and fourth generation, and then God is going to bless to the third and fourth generation. It's not like that. It says God is going to curse to the third and fourth generation, and then it says God is going to bless to thousands. So you see, what God is emphasizing is a relationship with him, not the curses and the generational nature of the curses. So let's not overemphasize the generational aspect of the curses. Let's emphasize the relationship with God. That is very crucial. Also, in the New Testament, the blessings and the curses which again in the New Testament we must recognize, you don't really find a lot there about curses, do you? You don't. You see blessings, you don't see curses. Because in the New Testament, the curses of the Old Testament takes a different dimension. In the New Testament, Jesus is emphasizing more about hell than Jesus is emphasizing physical curses. In the Old Testament, the emphasis is a lot on the physical curses. And why? Because it's Old Testament, Old Covenant. Old Covenant was with the people of Israel as a nation. It wasn't with all the nations of the world. So what am I saying? If you think you have a generational curse in your family because of this passage, start thinking about yourself. Are you a pre-Christian Israelite? If you're not a pre-Christian Israelite, then be very careful to be thinking that way. If you're a Christian, you need to start thinking differently. If you haven't watched the other videos I've done, go watch them where we're answering the question, who are you? And see if you're a Christian, then it is different. Even if you are not a Christian, in the New Testament, God showed the fulfillment of those curses. Because like I said, in the Old Testament, even when God listed those curses, they were not happening as literally all the times as he said. They were just a manifestation of what is bigger. And Jesus came and spoke about it. The bigger blessing is heaven. The bigger curse is hell. You see, we shall deal with it even further. But for now, look at a passage like Romans chapter 8. In Romans chapter 8, verse 8 and 7, it says, "For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God." What's the opposite? These people are haters of God. And in Exodus 20, verse 4 to 6, we read that the haters of God are cursed. But we don't see that in the New Testament, saying these people are cursed because they're haters of God. We don't see that there. Instead, what we see is that Christians in the New Testament are persecuted, while the wicked sometimes are those who are prospering. So you see, at the end of the day, this thing is very, very complex. But the New Testament helps us to clarify so that we know for sure what is a blessing. It leads to eternity. What is a curse? It is eternal. It is perishing in hell forever. We get to see that difference there. Again, however, it is still good to know that somehow, some way, God will angrily discipline, and the discipline may go from generation to the other, as limited as that may be. And does your situation fall under that? And if your situation falls under that, how do you break that yoke? You have heard a lot about breaking generational curses. You'll be surprised by the simple way to break generational curses if they exist at all in your life. Don't fail to watch the next video.